Alright, today we're going to be changing out the spindle and blade on this 42-inch Troy-built Colt XP zero-turn rider. It's a fairly simple process. If you want to save some money, not send it to a shop, I highly recommend it. It's very easy if you follow these steps. This should apply to most models. So follow along if you're interested. Alright, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pop off the deck mechanism on the rear, just like so. See how easy that was? Okay. Next, you're going to push the deck forward, pull the bar up, pull the deck back. Now, you also want to make sure you unhook your belt from the rear. I've already done that. You can do that by pulling this tensioner back and loosening your belt. Next thing you're going to do, raise your deck leveling mechanism to its highest position, moving the mechanism clear of the deck. Now my deck is ready to pull out. Okay. Just going to grab the deck, pull it out from under the lawnmower. Alright, I've got the deck out from underneath the lawnmower. This spindle is in good shape. This is no problem. Like I said, it was replaced last year. All the posts look good. It's a little loose, so I'll probably tighten it up a little bit before I put it back on the lawnmower. One thing you've got to remember is these things generate a lot of vibration. Those your blades can get chipped and worn, and when that happens, they get out of balance. So it's a good idea to make sure these are tight. Also, it's a good idea to replace your blades or sharpen them. And if you know how to balance them, that helps too. If anybody's interested in a video on how to balance your lawnmower blades, just comment and we can do that as well. This is the spindle that's in question. Upon further inspection, it's in a little better shape than I originally anticipated. None of the posts seem to be broken, so we're going to go ahead and remove this guard. This is your spindle guard. It keeps you from making contact with that when you're getting on and off your lawnmower. Keeps you from getting hurt. I've already loosened these two screws, these two bolts, so I'm going to go ahead and take them out and remove that guard. I'm going to set it aside. See the spindle a little better, and there doesn't seem to be any broken post, and it still feels pretty good. So I'm not going to actually replace that. I'm going to replace the blade. But as per this video, I will demonstrate, if it needs to be replaced, how to do that. Okay, now I've got the deck turned over. Looking at these blades, as you can see, this blade is still in pretty decent condition. There's a few chips on it, but it's still pretty well balanced. This blade has been abused. It's probably hit a few rocks and some hard tree branches it shouldn't have, so, and some roots and tree stumps and things like that. The first step into changing the spindle is going to be removing the blade. You're going to get a socket large enough to fit this nut. You want to make sure you lock this blade in place before you start working on it. What I like to do is grab a crowbar, insert it between the blade and this deck housing, and it will only allow the blade to spin so far. Okay, to remove this nut, I've got a 15/16 inch socket, a 3/4 inch drive wrench, and I've got about a 4-foot pry bar here that actually is part of a jack, and you're gonna have to rotate this spindle nut counterclockwise in order to get it off. Now that we've got the spindle nut loose, we can remove it by hand. Remove this nut, remove the blade, and that will expose your spindle. Next step, you're going to remove these 4 screws, these 4 bolts, and that will completely remove the spindle. Alright, the bolts on my spindle just happen to be 1/2 inch. Gonna remove these last 2, then we'll remove the spindle. As you're removing the spindle, have one hand underneath so you can catch it as it falls out while you're removing this last bolt. Since we have the spindle completely removed from the deck now, I'm gonna inspect it real well. Gonna look for any cracks, any damage to the housing. Gonna make sure it spins well, make sure the bearing feels tight. These bearings can be replaced, but it's easier to replace a spindle and it's no cheaper. If you replace the bearing, you'll have to have a press. You have to press this spindle shaft all the way through the housing, and then you have to press it back in once you get them changed out. Spindle looks in good shape, so we're going to go ahead and put the spindle back on, and if I was going to replace it, I just grab the new one and repeat these steps I'm about to perform. Now, to reinstall the spindle or install a new one, you're just going to reverse the steps of removal. Grasp the spindle, place it on the top side of the deck, align your bolt holes, and install the bolts. I suggest holding the spindle in place and hand starting 2 bolts so it holds itself in place, and then you can tighten the other 2 with your wrench and then tighten the last 2. Now, as you're tightening these bolts, it's important to remember most of these spindle housings are aluminum, and you have a metal bolt that you're installing into the spindle housing. So it's very important not to over tighten, because if you over tighten, you can bust this spindle post and you can cross thread it, which will cause you to need another new spindle. Another tip on installing these bolts: some people use Loctite. You can use Loctite, but when you go to remove these bolts, you'll have a real hard time removing them if you ever have to replace the spindle again. Okay, we've got the spindle in place. All 4 bolts are secured and tight. Now we're gonna look at the blades. This is the blade that came off, and you can see what condition it is in. Not looking too good. I do have a brand new blade that I've purchased. I'm gonna go ahead and replace the old blade with this one. Now, when you set your blade in place, they've done a nice job to make sure you can't put this on backwards. If you put it on backwards, your blade will be spinning the wrong way. The star pattern will not install upside down. It won't sit to the spindle like it's supposed to. You can flip it over, make sure the blade sits firmly against the spindle. as it does here. Now we're just gonna reinstall the spindle nut in the reverse method that we removed it. Now that we've got our blade changed and our spindle replaced, or new bearings in it, what have you, just gonna make sure it spins freely as the other. Looks good. Next step is to install the deck back to the lawnmower. We're just gonna reverse the removal steps. One more thing, we're gonna wait until we get the deck installed back to the lawnmower and get the belt routed before we put the belt guard back on the deck. Now that we've got the deck positioned back up underneath the lawnmower, we're gonna go ahead and slide this bar back into place. We're gonna push the deck forward, lower the bar. Let's see if we can do this. Just lower the bar just like so. Push the deck back, locking the bar into place. Next, we're going to attach the leveling pins to the leveler. Lower it all the way down, like so. Okay, this pin, pull it back. Align the leveler arm and reinstall the pin, just like so. You want to make sure when you set this pin back into place that the leveler is between this bar and this bar from the deck. Keeps the leveler in place. Won't allow it to slide out. And that pin's locked. Now we're going to go to the other side. After you get this pin locked into place, same position between the post on the deck, make sure it doesn't come out. Your next step is going to be installing the belt back to the lawnmower. It's important to make sure you follow the diagram and route the belt the same way as the diagram. Once you get your belt installed, you want to make sure you can spin your spindles. Make sure they're both spinning freely with no drag. This is how this particular belt is routed on this lawnmower. You've got a spindle here. The belt routes on the inside of the spindle to the outside of the right side blade spindle. It routes directly to the left side blade spindle, back around. This is your tensioner spindle. This is what keeps the blade tight, keeps the belt tight, sorry. And that routes back to the drive spindle. And that's pretty much it. One more step is to reinstall the spindle guard. To reinstall the spindle guard, we're simply going to set it into place. Make sure we align the bolt holes and secure using our 1/2 inch socket. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know in the comments.